A young girl named Emma loses her mother and is forced to live with a cold, distant aunt. But when Emma discovers her aunt's true motives, she takes a stand to stay with the only person who truly cares for her, her mother's old friend, Grace. Now Emma faces a life-changing choice that will test her courage and redefine what family really means. Will she find the strength to choose her own path? On a chilly November afternoon, Emma stood at the school gate, clutching the folded flyer she planned to surprise her mother with. Her small face, framed by wisps of untamed brown curls, lit up as she spotted her mother, Clara, hurrying down the street. But this wasn't the mother she remembered. Her pace was slower. Her once bright eyes looked worn. Emma's heart skipped as she caught the glimpse of sadness hidden behind Clara's tired smile, a shadow she hadn't noticed before. She hurried forward, wrapping her small arms around her mother's waist, clinging to the warmth she didn't know she'd soon lose forever. That night, after a dinner of reheated soup, Emma's innocent curiosity got the best of her. As her mother tucked her into bed, Emma pulled out the flyer, announcing the school's Mother's Day celebration, where mothers and daughters would sing together on stage. "Mom, will you sing with me?" she whispered eagerly, her eyes bright with anticipation. Clara hesitated, her hand lingering on Emma's cheek a moment too long. "Of course, my sweet," she murmured, though her gaze drifted, lost somewhere beyond the room. Clara closed Emma's door softly, but the night was anything but silent. Emma awoke to her mother's voice from the next room, hushed but tense. She could only make out pieces of the conversation Clara had over the phone, phrases like, "the bills," "can't keep this up," and "please give me more time." The unease in her mother's voice was a chilling contrast to the warmth Emma knew. Her chest tightened as she clutched her blanket, a quiet fear creeping in. The following day, Clara took Emma to their favorite spot, an old park on the edge of town with a faded bench under a massive oak tree. As the autumn leaves fluttered down around them, Clara handed Emma a small, delicate locket, a beautiful relic of their family with an engraving on the back that read, "For Courage." She explained with a faint tremble in her voice that this locket was special, passed down through the women of their family, each facing their own battles. Emma traced the words with her small fingers, feeling a warmth in the cool metal that seemed to carry her mother's spirit. Clara's fingers tightened around Emma's. "This will protect you, Emma. Never let it go." But that night, the reality Emma feared became painfully clear. She came home from school to find her Aunt Rachel, a distant woman with a stern expression, waiting on the porch. Clara was gone. Taken by a lingering illness she had hidden from Emma, her mother's absence filled their small house like an unyielding shadow. Heartbroken, Emma clutched the locket tighter, feeling her mother's love but struggling to understand why she'd been left behind. Days later, Emma found herself in her aunt's cold, meticulous house, a stark contrast to the cozy home she once shared with her mother. Rachel wasn't a cruel woman, but she was distant, her days spent in silence, preoccupied with her own affairs. She seemed to view Emma as a responsibility rather than family, someone she had to provide for rather than love. Emma tried to adjust, but as the days passed, she felt like a stranger in her own life. Every night she would curl up under the covers, holding her mother's locket, whispering to herself, "For courage," as if those words could shield her from the loneliness. The only warmth in Rachel's home was Grace, an elderly neighbor who would visit from time to time. She was gentle and kind, always bringing Emma small, thoughtful gifts like a knitted scarf or a freshly baked loaf of bread. Grace would sit with Emma, listening to stories of her mother, stories that Rachel seemed uninterested in. Grace became Emma's confidant, a faint reminder of the love she'd lost and someone she could cling to in the midst of her grief. But one evening, Emma overheard Rachel on the phone, her voice a harsh whisper as she spoke to someone. "It's just an old locket," Rachel said. "It's worth something, and the girl doesn't need it." Emma's heart froze. Her mother's final gift, the symbol of her love and strength, was about to be taken from her. In desperation, Emma made a decision that would change her life forever. She slipped out of the house in the middle of the night, her breath fogging the cold air as she clutched the locket to her chest. She knew exactly where to go: the old library, her mother's favorite place where Clara had read her stories of strong women overcoming impossible odds. Emma could almost hear her mother's voice, recounting tales of bravery and resilience as she walked alone through the empty streets. Inside the library, she found solace in the quiet, surrounded by walls lined with stories that reminded her of her mother's strength. She curled up in the corner, the locket clutched in her hand, wondering if her mother's courage could really protect her from the harsh reality she faced. Just then, she heard a soft voice. "Lost, are we?" It was Grace. She had followed Emma's trail, and upon seeing her huddled in the dark, felt an unspoken need to help. Grace offered her a gentle smile, the kind that made Emma feel safe for the first time since her mother's passing. Emma didn't say a word, but Grace seemed to understand. Grace gently placed a warm blanket around Emma's shoulders, and after a moment's pause, made an unexpected offer. "How about you stay with me for a while?" Her voice was calm, sincere, as though she had been waiting her whole life to extend this invitation. Emma hesitated, but the warmth in Grace's eyes reminded her of her mother. She nodded, and for the first time since her mother's passing, she felt hope, a glimmer that maybe she wasn't entirely alone. And so, Emma began a new chapter, one she couldn't have imagined, under the watchful care of Grace. Though her heart ached, she held on to her mother's locket, repeating the words she'd been taught, for courage, feeling the strength of all the women who had come before her, urging her forward. In the days that followed, Emma would learn the true meaning of courage and that love could be found in unexpected places, even in the midst of loss. In the weeks that followed, Emma settled into her new life with Grace. The elderly woman's small home was modest, but filled with warmth, a stark contrast to her aunt's cold, impersonal house. Grace lived a quiet life, but her kindness radiated in every gesture. She prepared hot meals for Emma, helped her with schoolwork, and listened with genuine interest to Emma's stories about her mother. Emma, still clutching her locket each night, slowly allowed herself to trust again, feeling safe in Grace's care. Yet, the transition was anything but easy. Emma's grief lingered, a heavy shadow that clung to her even in moments of comfort. One afternoon, as she helped Grace tidy up, she came across an old family photo of Grace holding a little boy. Emma glanced up, curious, and asked, "Is that your family?" Grace's eyes softened, but there was a sadness behind them. "That was my son, David," she said quietly, as if the words held a weight she rarely shared. "He passed away a long time ago." There was a silence between them, one heavy with understanding. Emma nodded, her own grief mirroring Grace's loss. It was as if, in their shared silence, they both acknowledged that some pains would never fully fade. Grace had a way of letting Emma grieve without pushing her to move on too quickly. She simply sat beside her when the sadness became too much, offering quiet reassurance and, sometimes, just holding her hand. Emma clung to this companionship, finding solace in knowing that Grace understood what it meant to lose someone deeply loved. One evening, Grace gently suggested that they take a walk together. It was an unusually warm autumn day, the setting sun casting golden hues across the neighborhood. As they walked, Grace led Emma toward an old church with a small, neglected garden. She knelt down and began clearing away leaves, revealing a patch of wilting flowers. "These were my David's favorite," she explained almost to herself. Emma watched, feeling the quiet intensity of the moment, and without a word, she bent down beside Grace, pulling away the dead leaves and carefully watering the remaining stems. In that simple act, she sensed that Grace was sharing more than just a memory. She was inviting Emma to help tend to a part of her heart. The days passed, and Emma began to flourish in Grace's home. She joined Grace in the library every weekend, where they spent hours lost in books, sharing stories of women who had endured hardship and found resilience in the most unexpected ways. Emma found herself drawn to one particular book about a young girl who had lost her family, yet found her strength in an adopted community. The story resonated deeply with her, and for the first time she began to imagine a life beyond her grief. However, one Saturday, as Emma sat reading at the library, her Aunt Rachel appeared, her eyes cold and calculating. Rachel hadn't visited or checked on her since she'd left, and her sudden appearance sent a chill through Emma's heart. Rachel greeted Grace with a forced politeness, but her gaze lingered on Emma with a sternness that unnerved her. "I've been thinking," Rachel began, her voice cool, "about the girl's situation. She has my family name, after all, and I suppose I have a certain responsibility." Her words seemed empty, mechanical, and Emma could sense there was more to her aunt's intentions. She gripped her locket tightly, as if it could shield her from whatever Rachel was planning. Rachel continued, "There are legal matters to consider, after all. Perhaps it's best that Emma returns to live with me where she belongs." Grace's eyes narrowed, but she remained composed. She met Rachel's gaze firmly, a quiet strength in her voice as she replied, "Emma is happy here. She's found a place where she's loved and cared for." But Rachel wasn't deterred. Her tone sharpened, and a hint of resentment crept into her voice. "It isn't about what's best for her, but what's proper. She is my niece, after all, and there are assets that she'll inherit someday, which must remain in the family." Emma felt a cold realization settle in. Rachel's interest wasn't born out of love or concern, but financial gain. She was only thinking of the inheritance Clara had left behind, an amount small by most standards, but significant enough for Rachel's interests. The following week became a tense standoff. Rachel insisted on Emma's return, and Grace, despite her gentle nature, stood her ground. Emma's heart wavered between hope and dread, caught between the warmth of Grace's home and the obligation Rachel seemed intent on enforcing. Grace reassured Emma that she'd fight for her, but Emma could see the worry etched into her face. Emma's quiet resilience grew with each passing day. She spent her afternoons at the library, clutching her locket and studying the books on family and inheritance, trying to understand her own rights. She confided in Grace about her fears, and Grace listened patiently, comforting her in small, meaningful ways. One afternoon, as Emma sat reading in a secluded corner of the library, she stumbled upon a small article in an old family law book. It described a clause about guardianship, stating that a child's voice and well-being had to be considered in custody arrangements if the child was over a certain age. Excitement stirred in her heart. She ran to Grace, who read the passage carefully, a gleam of hope sparking in her eyes. "That means if you speak up for yourself, Emma," Grace said gently, "you have a chance to stay." Emma nodded, her small hand clutching Grace's tightly. She had found the courage her mother had wished for her, a courage that rose from within her, steady and strong. The next time Rachel visited, Emma stood beside Grace, her head held high, her eyes unwavering. "I don't want to go back," she said, her voice firm. "I want to stay here, with Grace. She's my family now." Rachel was taken aback, momentarily thrown by the strength in Emma's words. But she quickly recovered, dismissing Emma's plea. "This isn't your decision, Emma," she said coldly, her eyes narrowing. But as she continued to insist, Emma saw the faintest flicker of doubt cross her aunt's face. And in that moment, Emma understood. This battle wasn't about power or money. It was about claiming her own life, her own heart. Grace gently intervened, her voice steady as she reminded Rachel of the law Emma had discovered. "Emma has a voice, and it's one we'll respect." Rachel's frustration grew, but as she watched Emma, she realized that the girl she once dismissed as quiet and timid had found a strength that would not be easily silenced. As Rachel left, her steps heavy with frustration, Emma felt a surge of relief and pride. She turned to Grace, and for the first time, she felt truly safe, truly home. In the warmth of Grace's embrace, Emma whispered, "Thank you for helping me find my courage." That night, as Emma held her locket, she knew that her mother's final gift had been more than a symbol. It was a reminder that courage wasn't just inherited, it was nurtured, grown in love. And in Grace's quiet, steady presence, she had found the family she'd longed for, a love strong enough to face any storm. In the following months, Emma and Grace fell into a comfortable routine. Grace's house became a sanctuary filled with laughter and warmth, a place where Emma's resilience blossomed day by day. Yet lurking in the background was the persistent threat of Rachel, who hadn't completely given up her claim on Emma. She sent legal letters, each more formal than the last, reminding Grace that this situation would not be tolerated forever. The final straw came one early spring morning when Rachel arrived unannounced, bringing with her a lawyer. Grace and Emma had just finished breakfast, and Emma's laughter still hung in the air when the knock came. She felt her heart sink, sensing the darkness Rachel's presence always seemed to bring. Rachel stepped in with a look of cold determination, her lawyer following with a stern, almost indifferent expression. "Grace," Rachel began, her voice tight with forced civility, "I'm here to resolve this situation once and for all. It's time Emma returned to where she belongs, with her family." Grace's usually calm demeanor grew tense, but she held her ground. "Emma is where she belongs. She's happy, and she's found a home here." Rachel's lawyer interjected, his tone formal, detached. "Legally, Ms. Rachel does have a claim as Emma's next of kin. Unless there is a formal adoption process in place, she holds custodial rights." Emma's heart pounded. Adoption? The word rang in her ears, filling her with a mix of hope and fear. She looked to Grace, whose face softened as she met Emma's gaze. But Grace's warmth couldn't counter Rachel's growing insistence. "I've spoken with Emma's school," Rachel said, ignoring the unspoken connection between Emma and Grace. "They're willing to transfer her immediately. I've made arrangements to get her settled." Her voice sharpened with impatience. "This situation has gone on long enough. I won't stand by while you keep her here against family wishes." Emma's courage surged to the surface and she stepped forward, her voice trembling but determined. "I don't want to go back with you, Aunt Rachel. This is my home now." Rachel's face tightened, her voice tinged with frustration. "Emma, you don't understand. This isn't about what you want. It's about what's best for you." Grace's gaze hardened, but her tone remained respectful as she addressed Rachel's lawyer. "Emma has a right to choose where she feels safe, where she feels loved. She isn't just a responsibility to be passed around." The lawyer barely flinched, responding with a tone as emotionless as a judge. "This isn't a matter of feeling, Miss Grace. The law favors family guardianship, and without a formal adoption, Rachel retains custodial rights." A silence fell over the room, as heavy as it was painful. Grace's face paled, but Emma's hand remained firm in hers. Emma's heart felt as if it would break under the pressure, the thought of losing the one person who had become her family. Desperation welled up and she turned to Grace, whispering, "Please, I don't want to go." And then a voice rose from behind them. "I think you should hear the child out." Everyone turned to see Mr. Lyons, the local librarian and a family friend of Grace's, standing at the door. He had known Clara, Emma's mother, and had watched Emma grow up over the years. His calm, kind face was now set with a rare intensity as he addressed the lawyer. "Emma has been through enough loss, enough upheaval," he continued. "The courts recognize a child's voice, especially when that child is old enough to express her wishes. I'm prepared to stand as a witness to support Grace's care for Emma and the stability it's provided her." Rachel's lawyer paused, momentarily caught off guard by this unexpected support, while Rachel's expression hardened in irritation. Emma glanced up at Mr. Lyons, her heart swelling with gratitude. He offered her a reassuring nod. Grace squeezed Emma's hand and took a deep breath, her own voice growing stronger. "Emma deserves a life filled with stability, where she's loved and respected as an individual, not just as a financial burden or a responsibility. If you truly want what's best for her, you'll respect her choice." Rachel's lawyer, sensing the growing weight of community support, hesitated before finally addressing Rachel. "Ms. Rachel, it may be wise to consider the child's preference, especially if a formal adoption is pursued. Fighting this in court would only cause additional hardship for all parties." Rachel's face flushed with anger, but her resolve wavered. She wasn't accustomed to opposition, especially not from someone like Grace, who she had always seen as meek and accommodating. But now, Grace stood like a shield between Emma and the world, her love a force Rachel couldn't break. In a final attempt to assert control, Rachel turned to Emma, her voice edged with bitterness. "You think you're doing what's best, but someday you'll understand. Family is family." Emma met her gaze steadily, her heart racing but her voice clear. "Family isn't just blood, Aunt Rachel. Family is love, and I have that here." Rachel, stung by Emma's words, took a step back, her face clouded with the realization that she had lost her battle. Her voice dropped to a low, cold murmur. "Then do as you wish, Emma, but don't expect me to be there when you change your mind. With that, Rachel turned sharply, her lawyer following behind her, leaving Grace and Emma standing together in the quiet aftermath. The front door closed with a finality that seemed to echo through the house, a symbol of the life Emma had chosen to leave behind. In the silence that followed, Grace knelt down to Emma's level, her eyes filled with warmth and pride. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You stood up for yourself, Emma. You found your strength." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, and of a newfound freedom. She had stood her ground, embraced her own voice, and declared her right to choose her own family. As Mr. Lyons smiled at them both, he reached out and placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Emma. She wanted you to be courageous, to stand tall, and today you did." Emma touched the locket around her neck, feeling the familiar inscription beneath her fingers. For courage. She understood now more than ever that her mother's final gift wasn't just an heirloom, it was a promise, a legacy of strength that Emma had carried in her heart. As she and Grace walked back inside, the sun began to set, casting warm golden light through the windows, filling their home with a quiet peace. Emma knew she had truly found her place, a life built on love and resilience. The shadows of her past had finally lifted, leaving her with the promise of a new beginning, hand in hand with the family she had chosen. The months that followed Rachel's departure marked the start of a new chapter for Emma and Grace. With the weight of custody battles and uncertainties behind them, they began to settle into the life they had carefully built together. The air in Grace's home felt lighter, and the bond between them grew deeper, no longer clouded by the fear of being torn apart. Emma was flourishing in ways Grace had only hoped to see. She joined a small group at school for students interested in literature and found herself captivated by the stories they read together. The tales of adventure, hardship, and redemption resonated with her in ways her classmates couldn't fully understand. Emma felt a profound connection to the characters who had faced loss, but continued forward, their resilience mirroring her own journey. One Friday evening, Grace noticed Emma sitting at the kitchen table, a notebook open in front of her, her pen flying across the page as she wrote with quiet intensity. When Grace leaned over to peek, she saw that Emma was drafting a story of her own, a story about a young girl who lost everything but found strength in the kindness of others. Grace's heart swelled with pride as she realized Emma was beginning to turn her pain into something beautiful, something she could share with the world. One crisp Saturday morning, as they walked hand in hand to the library, Emma spotted Mr. Lyons rearranging the books in the children's section. When he saw them enter, his face broke into a wide smile. He gestured to a display he had set up, filled with stories of strong, resilient girls and women, books he had chosen specifically for Emma. "Emma," he began warmly, "I thought you might like these. They're stories of young girls like you, girls who learned how to be brave." Emma's eyes sparkled as she took in the books before her. She clutched her locket, her mother's gift, and nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Lyon," she said softly. She picked up a book from the display, turning it over in her hands with a reverence that conveyed her gratitude. They spent the rest of the afternoon at the library, Emma absorbed in her reading, while Grace chatted with Mr. Lyons. Emma felt a calm joy in this place, a happiness she hadn't known in a long time. She looked over at Grace, whose face was lit with laughter as she recounted a story to Mr. Lyons, and realized that she too had found a family in more ways than she'd imagined. Later that evening, as they prepared dinner together, Grace surprised Emma by taking a small envelope from her pocket. She handed it to Emma, who looked at her in confusion. "What's this?" Emma asked, turning the envelope over in her hands. Grace smiled, a hint of pride in her eyes. "I've been saving for this for a while," she said. "Open it." Inside the envelope was a small gift card for a local bookstore with a handwritten note from Grace that read, "For Emma, who is destined to tell stories of her own." Emma's face lit up, and she threw her arms around Grace, the simple gesture carrying more gratitude than words could convey. "Thank you for believing in me." Grace held her close, her voice soft with emotion. "I believe in you, Emma, because I know you're capable of greatness, and I know your mother would be so proud of the young woman you're becoming." In the days that followed, Emma began spending her weekends at the bookstore, selecting novels and notebooks with the gift card Grace had given her. She became friends with the store's owner, a kind woman named Mrs. Holloway, who encouraged her to write down her thoughts and dream. Mrs. Holloway saw a spark in Emma, a talent waiting to be nurtured, and she invited Emma to join a weekly writing group for young readers and aspiring writers. Emma felt a new excitement brewing inside her. Writing gave her a sense of purpose and control, an outlet for the emotions she couldn't always express. She poured her heart into her stories, shaping the characters with the strength she had learned from her mother and Grace. Each story she wrote became a tribute to the legacy of courage she carried, the locket her constant reminder. As summer approached, the library held a small event for young writers to share their work. Mr. Lyons invited Emma to read one of her stories aloud, and though she was nervous, she accepted. Grace and Mrs. Holloway sat in the audience, their eyes filled with pride as they watched Emma step up to the podium. Emma took a deep breath, her fingers brushing the locket as she began to read. She shared the story of a young girl who, after losing her mother, found solace and strength in an unexpected friendship. Her voice was steady, filled with the quiet confidence she had gained over the past year, and her words resonated deeply with the audience. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Emma glanced at Grace, whose eyes glistened with tears of pride. At that moment, Emma felt a joy that went beyond applause or recognition. She had shared a piece of her heart, and in doing so, she honored her mother's memory, the courage that had been passed down to her. That evening, as they walked home under the warm glow of the streetlights, Grace took Emma's hand. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Your mother's gift, her courage. It lives in you, Emma." Emma nodded, her heart full. She understood now that family wasn't limited by blood. It was the love and support that had sustained her, the strength she'd found in unexpected places. She had a home, a family, and a future bright with possibility. As they reached the house, Emma looked up at the stars, a peaceful smile on her face. She thought of her mother, of the love she'd left behind, and felt a deep, unshakable calm. She knew that wherever life would take her, she would carry her mother's legacy forward. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to HeroKind Stories. There are more powerful, inspiring stories waiting for you. Share this video to spread the message of resilience and love. And don't go just yet. There's another story ready to unfold right here on our channel. Click to watch the next video and discover the strength of the human spirit.